Yeah, I think you have absolutely true. Like when you are saying like God giving you what do you say? Like the is not always what you want, but is all what you need in that moment. What do
Yes.
you
His his
what
his
do you
his ways are better. So
yeah.
to go back to our son, he was born 6 weeks early, had respiratory issues, couldn't breathe, and we were in the NICU, I think, for a total of 24 days. And even coming out of the NICU, things weren't perfect, and it was every 3-4 months we were going back to the hospital, going into the ER, having to stay overnight, and have multiple days in the hospital, and had this really difficult time. And one of the things that we went through in that moment was we were told that our son was permanently and completely deaf. Or sorry, not
Oh,
completely deaf. He had some hearing, but he was permanently deaf,
I'm so sorry to hear that.
would never hear more than what he was able to hear, and would likely only get worse. So my wife and I heard this and were like, all right, like, this guy's been through a lot already. And I think he was like 3 months when we figured that out, is what it is. Like, he'll, overcome this. And it's not something that we're going to allow him to use as an excuse. Right. So we were like, all right, like it wasn't the end of the world for us. Right. We still have a son. Our son is here on earth. He's still living. He's still got 2 hands, 2 feet. He can run. He can eventually talk, all that sort of stuff. Now, I mean, how does that look like? Because you have this hearing problem. And so we went back into the doctors, and were again confirmed that he had this hearing, like essentially no hearing. And it was worse in one ear than the other, but it was definitely permanent hearing loss. And obviously during this time we were praying about it, and we had family members praying about it, and all this sort of stuff. And it was the third time that we went into the doctor's office, and we redid the testing for, I don't really know why we redid testing, because the testing told us that it was permanent and all of that. But anyways, we went back in, we did the testing, and the doctor came out and said, I have no clue how to tell you this, but your son has hearing.
My
The hearing that was permanent hearing loss is now no longer permanent hearing loss. And they said, short of a miracle, we have no way to explain this. And
God is
I
best.
sat there and I said, we prayed. We like
God is
the
best.
only thing that I can say is that we prayed. And the really cool thing with it is that in the know of having a healthy baby, in the know of having a baby being born that has its hearing, and all the perfectness of what we want when you deliver a child, came this moment that we were able to see the Lord's hand at work, right? And a doctor is able to stand there, who trusts and believes in, medical field, and all that sort of stuff, right? Is there going, I can't explain this with all of my training, with all of everything that I know. I can't explain this other than it's a miracle. And I get to point to God and say, hey, there's a God. There's a God who loves us. There's a God who can heal. That doesn't mean that God will heal every single time, but God can heal, right? So when I talk about blessings in the know, the blessing in the know of having a healthy son when he was born was, just in this one instance, in this one moment, we were able to see the Lord's hand at work. And at a very young age, the Lord worked through my son in ways that only he could have worked through my son.
That's so sorry. That is the most interesting story I ever heard in a podcast. Like wow, that is wow. I assume like a lot of parents when they hear like your children is deaf completely lost faith. I can imagine that, but you don't. So maybe that was your test and you passed the
Maybe.
test.
Well, I hope I passed the test. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. We both, me and my wife, choose to love the Lord, and know that, even in the moments that are bad and are tough, that God is good through those moments. And it was during our time in the NICU, I remember being in the NICU, and getting all of those reports from the doctors of, this bad thing, that bad thing. Your son's not going to move. to a lesser hospital at this point. We're going to have to keep him another night. It was just, in many ways, it felt like it was defeat after defeat after defeat, or it was, one success, two steps backwards. It was, we think that he's going to leave tomorrow, and then, something happens that night. And no, it's going to be another 24 hours. It's going to be another 24 hours. Well, that 24 hours becomes 48 hours. And now you're still there a week later after you've kind of been told that, things were progressing and getting better. Right. And I remember during that time, I guess I was a little bit more active on Instagram, and I would take a photo of him every day, and I would like write something, and it didn't matter if we had a success, and it didn't matter if it was like a report of what, we would say is negative going on in his life. I ended every, you know, I called it a journal entry for myself through our times, because I wanted to go back and be able to read some of this. But in the moment, I also wanted to share with people so that they could be in prayer for us as well. But I ended every like journal entry with that, with God is good. And there are lots of people who come to me today, and when they see my son, they will say God is good. And it's in reference to like the journal entries that I put in. So it didn't matter if, he stopped breathing. It didn't matter if, he had machines hooked up to him and he, wasn't able to feed on his own, or whatever that hurdle was for that day. I finished by saying God is good. So I can vent. I can just feel like everything is going wrong, and that's okay. I can feel that way, but then I stop, I pause, I exhale, and I say God is good. And that was the thing that when we were told that he didn't have hearing and he was going to be deaf, and that was going to be something that he was going to have to deal with his life, we're, yes, obviously upset by that. But then we get to say, but God is good. Okay. So where do we go from here? So yeah, I will be completely honest, and I will say, when we were told that he was deaf, it was, okay, this sucks. God is good. How do we move forward from this? How do we start
That
learning sign language? How do we start, thinking about what does it look like to have a child who is deaf and can't hear? And, we're going to have to do all those things, right? Because that's what I would like to do and I can control, while God's being like, hey, you know what? Just wait. Like, I'm actually going to heal your son, right? So yeah, I can have my ways. I can have my plans. My plan when we had our child was to have a healthy child. My plan when we walked into the first doctor visit for his ears was that he would have hearing, right? And he didn't. And then I take that information, and then I have plans on how to learn sign language, and I have to learn all this sort of stuff. And then God's plan was, well, no, I'm going to heal him, right? So just because you hear a no from God doesn't mean that that's bad. Sometimes, or every single time that God says no, it's better. And there's a song right now that's kind of rattling around in the back of my head, and I'm not going to sing it because I'm a horrible singer, but it's that your ways are better. We often have our thoughts and our desires on what we want, but where were we when God formed the earth? Where were we when, he made the heavens and the waters and the mountains and all that sort of stuff? Like God was there, but we weren't, right? So God's been here since the start of time. He knows everything and all that. And I can put my faith and trust and hope in him, and realize that as Joel here in, Southern Ontario, have absolutely no understanding of anything that goes on in this world. And, I'm just a small little speck on the time of life. And I have like even less of a speck of knowledge on everything that goes on. So yeah, so going through that moment, kind of bringing that back to an earlier question that you asked me of, how and why do I follow Jesus in the way that I do, and have made it, part of my life, is part of what I've gone through with my son is that has been a faith building, refinement through the fire, so to speak, moment in my life that it's pretty hard for me to walk away from. It's hard for me to say that, God is not real, that this whole Christianity thing is fake, because I have seen certain things, right? I have gone through and had actual experiences, right? So yeah, those going through that, as much as it sucked, and I would not wish that on our next child, as we're expecting in the next week or so. And again, I am praying for a healthy pregnancy. I'm praying for a healthy birth. I'm praying for a healthy baby, but I can, in the worst possible outcome of what could happen over the next couple days or hours or whenever my wife goes into labor, even the worst possible outcome, as much as it might be really hard, and the worst possible outcome for me would be my wife dying in labor, would be a stillborn birth. I don't know how I fully believe it in the moment, but I can say that God is good, even in that worst time.
I'm
And that might sound difficult and tough for somebody to hear, but at the end of the day, it's not. I don't believe that it's God who makes people suffer. I don't think it's God who, if say my wife passed away during childbirth, it's not that he killed my wife. Unfortunately, there's sin in the world, and sin entered the world, and with that brought death. Right? My son didn't go through what he went through in the NICU when he was born, because that was something that God put on him. I don't think that he makes us suffer. I don't think that he torments us that way, like some sick little person up there that's poking us with needles or creating things in our life that is bad. I think that's just the chaos in the world, and how and what sin has done to this world. But he's able to take those moments, he's able to take our pain, he's able to take our suffering and turn that into something that's actually beautiful and points us to him, right? So that's where I can say that God is good, is that in the chaos that we see in the world, right? From buildings burning to people dying to, why does a 1-year-old have cancer? What did that 1-year-old do to deserve cancer? Well, you know what? That 1-year-old didn't do anything to deserve cancer, but unfortunately he does have cancer because of sin and the chaos that's in the world. But in that chaos in the world, there's a God who is bigger and a God who is greater, who actually has control, dominion, and sovereignty, and he is good. Yeah, and to go through a moment like that is where I can see that, yes, there might be this chaos, there might be this brokenness, but there's still God who's at work and God who is bigger. And that's why I can say that I am glad. I feel like that's the wrong language to use, but I'm glad we went through what we went through with my son, because I can now say in those moments that God is good because of the experience that I've had.
wow, wow. I think this is so powerful. Like this is like I think you're absolutely true, because in my situation, like I was down, I was not really doing good and this stuff like this year. And but I always, no matter what happen, I'm always go in Monday. If I'm in my country, I'm doing that. Like I'm trying to not waste any Mondays. So fast for like bedtimes and fast for like the point is, you don't know in this struggle. You cannot say I am happy because I was struggle. A lot of people say I'm happy, I went through this, not I'm happy, I'm in here right now, because they doesn't see that big plan.
Right.
That doesn't see the big plan. So like, and when and the bad times and the like Friday, I was like have information podcast in the is the 67 best podcast in my country for
That's awesome.
for the category on business. I was in this moment I was say God is best, bro. God works mystery ways. He is the best. Like, and I see I need to go through this. What I go through this, I see I can have this,
Right.
and that's true. Like, but your story is so good. Like, thank you for sharing with us. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome. I
really
just want to say,
appreciate it.
though, that my story is no better than your story. Actually, before I went to bed last night, I was talking with someone on X and DMs, and he kind of was saying to me, I guess, that he appreciated that I was a little more open and forward in terms of, who and what I think Jesus is, and kind of talking about Jesus. And he actually referenced the verse in my bio of Proverbs 11:1, and he just said like how like that's been an important verse and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know if he was exactly saying that he felt shame or anything in terms of being a private Christian, but that's just the label that he put. And one of the Christians that I think was the most public in terms of his faith and what he did, and one that I think majority of the people around the world would know was Billy Graham. And I said to him that God uses Billy Graham for his good, but God also uses you. And I'm not going to use his name, but I'll say that his name was Joel. Like, he uses you, Joel, in the exact same way, in only a way that you, Joel, can be worked through, right? So yes, Billy Graham led thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people to the Lord. But if he uses you, he's using you only in a way that he can use you. So when you say that, like, oh, my story is great, well, no, yes, my story is great because God is greater. But your story, anybody who's listening to this, your story as well is just as great as even the greatest person out there that you think their story is, because it's your story and it's the way that God is using you. And that is important.
Yeah, that's so cool, and I think your story is so inspiring because like it's like showing like when you trust God, when your harder times, God is there, and God is never leave you. God is always there. You need just to trust Him. And that's cool. So my next question is: I know you said like in the morning routine, but what is your daily walk with God look like? Do you have any special routine that keeps you close to Him? I know you, you said morning, but do you have any more?
Yeah, it's for me, I have found it's important to start my day reading the word and whatnot, and that looks different throughout my life. And some days or some parts of my life, like it's been more just reading a verse or two in the morning and starting my day that way. Right now, in terms of like my reading goals and just my goal for 2026 and reading the whole Bible, that's actually going through a reading plan. So that's something of more like a 20 to a 40 minute, study actually of the text, and reading multiple chapters and then trying to figure out context and, what is actually trying to be said, what are the applications here, all those types of things. But yeah, during my day, something that I have found really big is listening to music. It's listening to Christian music. I was someone who, like, I work a job where I can have an earbud in, and because I'm kind of working by myself, right? I'm a cleaner. So I can often have earbuds in, and when I started doing, and I've always kind of worked like in laborious jobs. So I would say that I've always sort of, and the majority of the jobs that I've worked, I've always, listened to music specifically. And when you're listening to stuff that isn't, say, of God, right? It's easy to be influenced by that. So to listen to music that's talking about everything counter to what God believes, well, that was kind of coming out of me, whether that was swearing, whether that was, how I thought of the world, or, just so rerouting myself in Christian music, listening to worship music, or listening to, and being in 2026, like, we actually have some decent music that, are Christian artists that, I think a lot of, or not a lot of, but even secular people kind of now listen to, in terms of, like, Forrest Frank is someone who, whether or not you like him or not, but that's something that even, I would say non-Christians now are listening to, and are finding goodness in it. So we're kind of blessed to live in a world of, Christian music doesn't necessarily sound different than worldly music. And it's like, oh, but I like the beat on, this music. Well, like, now, like, those beats are kind of in Christian music, and Christian music is good and pleasing to the ear in a cultural way as well. But yeah, listening to worship music, listening to Christian music is something that I think helps me. I think it's also really good. My wife is someone who really helps in my daily walk, because when I say or do something that isn't right, she's a pretty good sounding board to tell me, hey, cut that out, Joel. That's not
Mhm.
that's not really God honoring, right? And she's a good litmus test for me to see if I'm on the right path. And I do give a lot of credit to her, and her being in my life is very important in that way as well, of, grounding me in my faith and in my walk, and my kids too. I know there was a couple weeks ago, I was saying something, and I was having a really hard time. I forget exactly what it was, but I was stressed out, and I was like, this isn't working out. Like this is really hard. And my son came up to me and he goes, "Daddy, can I pray for you?" And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like here I am trying to lead my son to know the Lord, and I am basically in this moment showing him my doubt and how I'm not trusting the Lord. And he comes up to me, and he's 5 years old, and he says, "Hey, Daddy, can I pray for you?" And it was just that hit to me of, yeah, wow, like,
I
I need to
understand.
bring this back to God. Like, I am saying this because I can't do this in my own strength, but I can do this with the Lord. And yeah, he prayed for me. He was like, "I hope that, Daddy, has help and all this sort of stuff." So yeah, it's having other people in my life. Like my wife is huge to who I am and what I am as a Christian. And amazingly, like my kids are the same. They're a good a reality check a lot of times, right? And
Hmm.
then, out from there, there's the church. We do go to church every Sunday, and I have people in my life. It's not, I think we often like to, at least here in the West, in Canada, and kind of like in church
Hmm.
culture here, we often use the word like our personal faith. It's our personal walk with God. And as much as, yes, it's our personal walk with God, there's more to it. And there's a verse in Ecclesiastes, and I'll butcher the verse, but it's the cord of three strands. One strand is easily broken, two strands is stronger, but a cord of three strands is not easily broken. And the way that I look at that is that, it was actually one of our wedding verses, is that there's me as one strand. I can be broke. There's two of us. Now this is a stronger strand. So me and my wife, that can still be broken, but that cord is stronger. But now a cord of three strands woven together, which the third strand now is God, right? Is not easily broken, right? And we can apply that to in different ways, is that yes, there's me, but then there's also my wife, like my family, and then there's also the church. Like it's not just my personal walk with God. It's not just, what I'm able to do to become a good Christian. There's a communal aspect to it. There's more than just the personal walk. There's also the corporate walk, right? And I think that's why we're called to go to church. It's not just for our own sake, it's for other people's sake. It's
Hmm.
it's how do I walk alongside of you, right? So that is a very important thing in, my personal walk with God, is the walk that I have with other people as well. It's having friends in my life that are Christians. It's having, people in my life that are godly, that can reorient and say, "Hey, Joel, you're getting off the mark here. Joel, you're doing something wrong here," and kind of direct me back to God. So yeah, it's, wake up in the morning and read the Bible. Like I get up, make coffee, read my Bible, then have breakfast and kind of go about my day. Christian music has been really, really important, but it's also just grounding myself around people who know the Lord. And, for people who don't have people in their life that know the Lord, and I know, in different areas and different people in where they are in their walk with God might not have a lot of people who do know God. But that's why, I think we need to share the good news of Jesus and with others, and then bring other people to the fold that way. So yeah, those are just, I guess, three things that, are really important in my walk with God. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to listen to Christian music to be a good Christian. It doesn't mean that you have to have, a wife to be a good Christian. But these are things in my life that are important. And Christianity is not something that, there's no perfect recipe. The recipe is that you want to be with Jesus. And the way that you get there is, I think, by wanting to see him, right? Like if you
Hmm.
want to go to Paris, you need to figure out how to go to Paris and to Paris. But if you're like, oh, Rio de Janeiro, oh,
Hmm.
Washington D.C., like
Yeah.
you're gonna be distracted, right? So by narrowing that down to only now seeing Paris, you're gonna get to Paris. And it's the same thing with Jesus. Is the more things that you can put in your life to help you focus on who Jesus is, you're gonna see Jesus.